Well, greetings and salutations, everyone, and welcome back to today's bonus upload. I hope everyone is still doing well. Before we jump into it, a couple links. As many of you know, I rely on Patreon, PayPal, channel membership, and the merch to help the channel to continue to grow and go. Links to Patreon, PayPal, and channel membership is in the description below. Merch displayed directly under the video. Also, Dogman Frightening Encounters, Volume 1 through 3, the audiobook versions. They were written and researched by Tom Lyons, narrated and produced by me, Jeff Nadolny. Those audiobooks are available on Audible, Amazon, and iTunes, links to which are also in the description as well. And finally, last but definitely not least, if you'd really like to help support the channel to continue to grow and go, simply subscribe. It doesn't cost a cent. Click the like button, takes half a second. If you don't want to miss out on any of the informative uploads I put out daily, click that bell icon, and folks, please leave a comment. Why? Well, because all these things really do help the channel to continue to grow and go. And yes, folks, they definitely do matter. Now, everyone, I have taken far too much of your time. Let's jump in to today's bonus, shall we? And today's first terrifying experience. I grew up in rural Missouri. My family moved there in 1985 when I was 4 years old, about 15 to 20 minutes from the closest town. The closest town being Wright City, Missouri, about 15 minutes north. It really was in the middle of nowhere. You had to drive a mile or two down a gravel road before you got to a gravel road I lived on. That was about 1.5 miles long, that only my family and our neighbor lived on. It was about 3,000 to 4,000 acres north of us that no one lived on, and about 1,000 acres south of us that no one lived on. It was all owned by the same guy who only came out during deer season to hunt the property south of us, and lived in town about 20 miles west. The land north of us was mostly incredibly hilly forest, with a few caves about 1 mile north of the house. The land south of us was about 50-50 woods to fields, with an old 100-plus-year-old abandoned cabin deep into the woods, and a wagon road to it that had grown up. The property owner had told us that no one had lived there since the 1800s. I've had a few sightings while growing up there. I had always told myself it was Momo, the Missouri Monster, Missouri's version of Bigfoot. Wasn't until I saw a trail cam photo of what was said to be the forest ghoul several years later. This led me to do a little more research that I will mention later. Now, the first memorable sighting was when I was a teen. Myself, my brother, my sister, and Dad were playing a game I had learned in Boy Scouts called Manhunt. It's basically a blend of hide and seek and tag. We had set up boundaries around a cedar thicket just north of the house. Myself and my little brother were on one team against my dad and sister. Me and my brother were first, with my dad and sister eventually catching us. Then we'd let my dad and sister hide and we'd find them. We ended up catching my sister, but we could not find my dad, so we started working together. The cedars were thick and the sun was setting. We were probably in the last 10 minutes of daylight for the day. We wanted to catch our dad fast before we couldn't see anymore. We searched most of the area and didn't find him. Eventually, I spotted what looked to be 2 feet that were 20 to 30 feet in front of us. They were barefoot and pale. Not thinking much of it, I told my brother I thought Dad had taken his shoes off to be more stealthful. We spread out, maybe 20 feet apart, and tried sneaking up on him from opposite sides, crouching the whole way so we could see under the cedar trees, because we couldn't see through the thicket. We got about 15 feet away before it realized we were coming upon it, and it took off. We both took off running after it, thinking it was Dad. We chased it to the edge of the thicket, where there's a small open glade before the start of a large forest that spread back into the hills. We yelled that he was running out of bounds, and as we got to the edge of the thicket, we noticed what appeared to be a pale, naked man jetting into the woods. This spooked out my brother and myself, but we still wanted to believe it was just Dad playing around with us, so we ran the opposite direction back south toward the house, only to see my dad sitting next to my sister by the pond easily 100 yards across the field from the thicket. We asked my dad how he had gotten there so fast, and he and my sister told us that he had been sitting here for 20 minutes, waiting for us to figure out he was not in the woods. My brother and I tried to explain what we saw to him, but he blew it off, saying it was probably just a deer. Meanwhile, we had chickens multiple times as I was growing up. Normally, they'd be fine in the chicken coop for a few months, then something would start killing them, tearing open the wire fence to the caged yard. Usually, we'd find 1 or 2 chickens torn up and lying in the yard. Mom and Dad said it was always dogs, but the chickens never looked like they had just slaughtered. We always repaired the fencing, yet it kept happening. Usually, once it started, most of our chickens would be dead and gone within a week or 2. My mom would be upset since she was the one that wanted to have chickens and would normally give up on them until the next spring, and she'd get a couple dozen more. Sometimes she'd skip a year, but I can think of at least 4 to 5 occasions of getting batches of chickens and they all died. Eventually, she gave up and took a few years off from trying to raise chickens. My senior year of high school, she decided to have chickens again. It was good at first, then a couple of months later, they started getting killed again. This time, though, it was peeling off the wire roof to the caged yard. The cage was about 5 to 6 feet tall. My dad said it was dogs, but the opening would normally be a few feet off the ground. I remember questioning my dad at that point, saying, if it was dogs, wouldn't they try to dig under the fence, not go on top? The slaughtering seemed to be worse than before, with the dead chickens being tossed all over the yard, yet just tore up, not eaten. My sister had gotten a pygmy goat the year before and raised it for FFA. One day we found it dead and mutilated as well. It was in the stable yard on the side of our barn with a 6 to 7 foot fence around it. Yet something had still gotten to it. My parents still claimed it was dogs. Then one night my sister's boyfriend was having a bonfire party and I went over there with my sister because my parents wouldn't let her go to the party without me going with her to watch over her. My sister got really drunk, but I didn't drink much because I was too busy watching over her. I think I had maybe half a beer all night. We left late at night, maybe 1 or 2 in the morning. When I got home, I'd park my truck in the yard next to the driveway, usually facing the chicken coop. I pulled in and my sister started screaming and pointing forward. I looked up and saw what at the time I could best describe as something that looked like Gollum from the Lord of the Rings on the roof of the chicken coop. It was staring right at us, crouched down, just like Gollum normally was in the movies. It was pale white, and it had a very thin hair on top of its head, probably less than Gollum had in the movies. And it had 2 red eyes that glowed in the headlights. It appeared to be hissing at us. I locked the doors and quieted my sister down, and started honking the horn and flashing my brights and regulars at it. Me and my sister were both freaked out. It jumped off the back of the chicken coop toward the direction of the woods north of the house, and we lost sight of it. My parents had turned on the lights outside at that point and were looking out the door. I grabbed my sister and ran as fast as I could inside with her. When we tried to tell my parents what we had seen, they refused to believe us, told us that we were drunk and full of crap. I tried to tell them that I wasn't drunk, but they wouldn't believe me. Sadly, my sister was so drunk, she didn't even remember coming home the next day. A few nights later, we were all gathered up in the living room to watch a movie we had rented from the video store. As we're watching the previews, we heard the chickens screeching. My dad is still convinced it was dogs and had a loaded .30-30 rifle by the back door ready for them to show up again. He ran, grabbed his rifle and a spotlight also near the door, and ran outside. A few moments after he was outside, we heard a gunshot followed by continuous firing until he emptied the whole magazine. This was not unlike him. Growing up, he taught me and my brother that a good hunter only takes 1 shot at something. If you need 2 or more, you're not good enough shot. He even made us get our first kill with a single-load muzzle-loader black powder rifle before we could use a regular rifle with magazine. Never in my life had I heard my dad unload a full mag at something. He charged back in and immediately told us kids to go and lock all the doors and windows to the house. He was white as a ghost. Meanwhile, he said he needed to talk to my mom. He took my mom into the back room and closed the door, where they were at for 20 minutes or so. I already knew what it was. I was already scared before he even went outside. Me and my brother and sister waited in the living room until they were done talking. I asked my dad what he had seen, and he said he didn't want to talk about it, not to bring it up again. The next day, he and my mom decided to slaughter all of the chickens, and that was it. We weren't getting any more. To this day, my dad still will not talk about what he saw, and nowadays acts like it never happened and plays stupid. I went off to college a couple months later and never saw it again after that. I'd sometimes tell people they're my mom's story, but never really thought much more about it. That's pretty much as far as it goes for sightings. This next part is a little more weird stuff I learned about the area. A decade or so later, I was dating a girl who claimed she was sensitive and stuff. Claimed she could see and feel things like ghosts, magic, etc. I just always thought it was cute and played along. Little personality quirk. And really didn't buy into it. Anyway, I hadn't told her the story yet, and we were out at my parents' house sitting around a fire in my parents' backyard. She started acting really weird. She turned and started staring toward the north woods and asked me if I knew anything about those woods. She said she was getting a feeling that something really ancient and evil were in those woods back there. Asked me what I knew, then started asking me what had happened on the land. Told me that something horrible had happened after hearing my story. She said she had thought it could be a ghoul. I honestly had no idea what, but it was enough to get me do some digging. I immediately saw a picture online shortly after Googling about ghouls that were labeled a forest ghoul. It was the famous trail cam pic. I immediately lost it and was like, that's it. That's what I saw back then. Read about how although they like to kill stuff, they don't like fresh meat and prefer stuff when it's starting to rot. It totally made sense to me at that point. Why would it slaughter the chickens only to come back for them later, after they had been lying around? I then started trying to research the area's history to find out more. When you first turned off the paved road onto the first gravel road, there were foundations of old buildings in the woods. Walls and roofs were gone, just the stone floors remained. One of the old men that lived nearby when I was growing up said that one of them used to be an old post office. Did some more digging and found that it was once the town Hickory Grove, once the county seat as well. I knew that this name was of the voting district, but didn't know it was a town. It was established in the early 1800s, but after the Civil War, a group of rebels that had refused to surrender had come through and ransacked the town. They had gathered up all into a church where they locked themselves in and burned themselves alive. Turns out the church was about less than a quarter of a mile from my parents' house. In that decade or so that followed, what was left of the town died out. The few residents that were left had moved away, claiming that the town was cursed. Before 1900s, the town had vanished. I also learned around 1920 they had dug out the area where the church had burned down to collect all the remains they could find and properly bury them. There was now a large quarried pond where it once was. Not sure how relevant that information is to the sighting, but I always wondered if perhaps they were related. The land north of my parents' house has been getting developed over the last decade or so. There is a high-class gated rural community that bought it, who just got the township a few years ago, called Innsbrook, Missouri. They've been clearing the land and building mansions and lakes back there. Lots of old CEOs and retired professional athletes live back there. I've always wondered if that chased that thing off. So really quick, I don't want people thinking that this creature was like Gollum. It looked like Gollum to this guy. But what he saw, the infamous trail cam video he's talking about, is what people call the rake, what I call crawler, just that white kind of alien looking creature. I had a theory a while ago that these things were like inorganic beings that kind of lived kind of in between our realm and another. And they played off of our fears, off of what we were thinking about in the woods. The theory still kind of holds in my brain, but I'm not sure. I kind of feel that maybe these things are a physical presence. The only reason why I felt that way prior was because there was hardly any human interactions, human attacks. But then I got thinking about it, and if these were just inorganic beings and they fed off of our fears, then why were they killing other animals and mutilating and eating them? So just something to think about. So let's move on. And today's second experience. I live in a small town in northeastern Pennsylvania that's surrounded by farms and endless forest. As a kid, I spent most of my time fishing for trout or building stick forts. Now I have bonfires and hunt deer. So as you can imagine, I'm outside most of the time. At this point, I know almost every paw print or call of the local animals, and I can identify it almost immediately. At the age of 13, I went over to one of my friend's homes for his birthday party, mid-June, alongside of 2 other friends. We used to hang out a lot, but after this incident, things happened, and we fell apart and went our own ways. Anyway, we were crazy in imagining exploring abandoned places, finding paranormal spirits, as all the YouTubers did at the time. About 3 miles into the forest, there was this abandoned quarry. All of us were excited to explore it, so we got the birthday boy, his name's Aiden, to lie to his dad and say we were going for a walk through the woods. Aiden's dad said yeah, but not to wander off too far and to pay attention to the trees due to the number of mountain lion sightings in the area recently. Many say they don't live here in Pennsylvania, said to be a boogeyman of sorts, but I've seen one with my own eyes, and I can tell you, they are here along with wolves. We geared up, grabbed our phones and knives. Well, at the time, I didn't have a knife, but I borrowed one of them from one of the bigger guys. His name was Clayton, and he's a little out of shape, putting it nicely. He usually brought up the 10 knives to our parties like some sort of serial killer. Sometimes he made me worry. He also gave one to our 4th guy, named Marcus. More ghetto than country, but it's okay. We got along at the time. As we packed our bags, we got ready. We poked fun at each other, me insulting Aiden's choice of footwear, wearing a pair of black and white Vans, while the rest of us wore boots. Clayton poking fun at me for being the smallest guy in the group, and Marcus backing up Clayton's insults as we headed out the door, excited for what we were going to find in this amazing abandoned quarry. Imagining old mine shafts deep in the ground where coal was mined or copper, the air seemed to change. Change as in heavier. Like when a kid in class threatens to kill everyone in the room. Yeah, that kind of heavy. Almost a primitive fear. As I looked around curious about what installed this primitive fear into my system, the others talked about what we were going to find. I think we're going to find some coal. Maybe we can sell it to the local farmer, commented Clayton, in an almost wishful sort of way. "It's a quarry, dummy. It's not a mine shaft," yelled Aiden. Furious with Clayton's idiotic comment, Aiden had the tendency to get angry over the stupidest mistakes. Even a misspoken word was enough to set him off. "Same thing, mine shaft, quarry, your mom's ass. All things worth exploring," Clayton said in a mocking tone. "Shut the F up before I rock your fat butt," Aiden yelled in rage, almost about to throw a fist and knock out his teeth. As Marcus calmed both of them down, I zoned out, as we were walking into the woods now after going through a field. The feeling of dread was getting stronger, and I almost wanted to run. I knew we were being watched. I always knew. When someone stares at me in class, I usually look directly at them when I notice that feeling. I started to scan the surroundings: maple trees, rocks, cliffs, bones, birds, beehives. Wait, bones? I backtracked to where I had seen the bones and looked a little closer. About 60 yards away, at the bottom of the cliff, was a dead deer. Fresh, blood still on its bones, flesh hanging from its skull. I imagined that the thing that could have mutilated it so badly, and thought of a 1,000-pound black bear with rabies. Honestly, now I wish it was a bear. "Hey, dipstick, I'm talking to you," Clayton pegged me with a rock and broke my trance. "What? What do you want, man?" Clearly annoyed. "I said, what are you looking at?" Clayton barked, irritated that I didn't respond sooner. "Nothing. Come on, let's get going. We still have another 2.5 miles till we get to the quarry." Nothing exciting happened as we climbed down the large hill. I felt the air getting heavier and my primal fear clawing its way up my spine as if it was about to dig itself out. Once we reached the top of the hill was a level part, still filled with maple and birch and some decent-sized rock. There was a barbed wire fence that led to the clearing, freshly mowed like field. Aiden commented, saying that this was his property and his neighbor probably was trespassing again. As we got to the fence, I noticed something red hanging from the fence, a rag or a piece of clothing covered in dried blood. And underneath it was a rusted old knife with a saw blade on one side and a sharper edge on the other. Me and Marcus argued for a minute about who got the knife. I gave in and let him have it. We crawled under the fence and walked through the field. Right now, we are only about a half a mile away from the quarry. I zoned out again as we walked. No one was talking about anything exciting anyway, and I scanned my surroundings when my fear jumped almost right out of me. I couldn't place it as I frantically looked around. Something bad, no, something evil was nearby, and I could sense it. I was at the back of the line, so no one noticed my panic. I went tree to tree scanning for something out of place, and when I got to the birch tree roughly 25 yards away, I saw it. There was a large, lengthy gray hand wrapped around the tree. I could almost make out claws. I looked up above the hand, and I could just barely see an edge of a head. I looked at my friends, who got a little bit ahead of me, looked back at the tree, and the gray thing was gone. I ran up to catch up to my friends, deciding to keep what I saw quiet, so I was not to be made fun of for the rest of the weekend. We finally started to see a clearing up ahead with another barbed wire fence. We walked through a patch of thorn bushes, about as tall as me, and it shredded our bare torsos as we took off our shirts and hung them around our shoulders. We crouched under the fence and made it to the quarry. Now, almost 50 years later, it was just some old cow pasture. We were a little bummed out, as we were hoping for an ultimate mine shaft experience, but we knew logically what we would find. There was this cool little part of rock that was cut out, leaving a 10-foot drop below to a cow pasture. We went over there and screwed around on the cliff. It was roughly 100 yards away from the tree line, so we were a little far from the woods. There was a pallet with some perfectly cut square rocks on it, and we looked through them, fascinated at how precise they were, but in the end, we just left them. Aiden got the idea to take some Instagram pics, and as we got into the position to take the photos for our pages, Aiden, we all spun around toward the woods, hearing his dad, but it was off, almost mechanical. Startled by how quiet it was, almost a whisper, but the woods were 100 yards away, my fear crawled its way into me, and I wanted to go home knowing something was wrong. "Guys, we need to go," I stated, walking toward the tree line, and the others followed. My fear grew stronger and stronger as I scanned the field, then cliff, then trees. As I was walking, we were at the tree line, scrambling under the fence. Snap! A branch cracked not far from us. We all looked. Marcus still under the fence, and we saw it. 20 yards away was this 9-foot human-like animal. No, not animal. It stood on 2 legs like a human, with its gray, skinny arms ending at its knees, and its claws were as big as its hands. It was partially crouched, perching its elbows on its knees, staring at us with its hot red eyes. Teeth stuck out of its mouth like piranha, with large canine-like teeth. Its teeth were an ugly yellow and blackish color, with some bloodstains on the top row. We all stood frozen and staring at this creature. Then its eyes snapped to mine. It had made eye contact with me and twitched. In fear, I let out a gasp. Its eyes perked up as it heard this, as if in pleasure. It slowly stood up, breaking my trance, and I jumped into flight mode. "Run!" I screamed, making a dash for home. The field only 50 yards away. The creature let out the most metallic, human, bear-like roar. Scream filled me with fear, and I could sense the hate in its veins. This monster was primal. We ran like hell as it chased after us, dodging left and right, changing direction, tripping up so it couldn't catch us. We dove under the barbed wire fence and kept running. I looked back to see it hurdle the fence like it was nothing, hot on our heels, running on all fours. I tripped over a branch and rolled, catching myself, and kept running. But this put me at the back of the line. I felt its hot breath on the back of my neck as I ran. It let out another scream, and I jumped off a nearby cliff to my right. My friends did the same. It was only a 15-foot drop into some dead leaves and grass, so we landed somewhat nicely. Except I rolled my ankle in the process, and Enid landed on his knee on a rock. I looked back and seen I almost landed on a deer corpse from earlier. That gave me a spark of renewed energy. The tree line was only 300 yards away, and we ran like hell. We heard it screeching, scrambling down the hill at full speed. We vaulted over rocks, slid under a fallen tree, and this thing was right on us the whole time, teeth bared, roaring in hatred. I knew the only goal this abomination had was to mutilate us like that deer. We ran and ran, then it roared again, this time sounding almost in defeat. We cleared the tree line and ran to the road. We turned back to see where it was, and it stood just in the tree line, almost out of view, but still visible enough to see. Evan croaked in my voice so unnatural and satanic, almost like the demons in movies, but more metallic. I didn't mention this before, but my name is Evan. My friends always call each other mean things, so we rarely use our real names. Instead of primal fear this time, I felt primal rage. I puffed out my chest and slammed my hands on my pecs. "You want a piece of me, you ugly son of a... Come and get me!" I screamed, a little unsettled by my primal outburst. This thing simply smiled, turned around, and walked away. We all looked at each other and went back to the house. Aiden's dad didn't hear the scream, so we had nothing to explain. We went and hid in his room in silence. None of us really talked about it much, except for me. If I was to ask them now about it, they would probably just say it was a bear and we overreacted. But I'm telling you now, there is more to come to prove suspicions, at least to me. Alright folks, I hope you all enjoyed this bonus as much as I enjoyed sharing it with you. I'd like to thank you all for supporting the channel. It is your support, after all, that keeps the channel growing and going. And honestly, what gives people a chance and a place to share their experiences and theories judgment-free, simply treated with the respect we all deserve. Thank you. Please stay safe, happy, healthy, and ever vigilant, keeping an eye on our children, pets, family, and friends. These creatures are real, they are out there, and they are dangerous. Share this info with the people you love and care about, and it may just help save their lives someday. Until next time, never stop asking questions, never stop searching for answers, and God bless.